In this video, we are going to discuss about the most frequent question which is asked in microservice interview question. What is single sign-on? How you are going to implement single sign-on in microservices? How you are going to implement SAML, and what is OAuth? What is JWT? So these are like a single question. So they may ask like any indirect way of questions, like how you are going to implement SSO, or how you're going to sessions transaction management in microservices. So based on the interview response on the request, we should going to be uh, we should be able to answer it. So first we'll discuss about what is single sign-on. A single sign-on is a authentication method which enables the users to securely authenticate with multiple application and websites by using just one set of credentials. Uh, we're going to tell how it works. So we have a service provider which can the user can enter the username and password, and identity provider. Identity provider is can be like where this confirms that user is user has with us and confirms that the credentials are correct. This is called identity provider. So the SSO works based on the trust relationship set up between the applications, between service provider and identity provider. So it's a trust relationship is often based on the certificate that is exchanged between identity provider and service provider. This certificate can be used to sign the identity information that is being sent from identity provider to the service provider, so that the service provider knows it is coming from the trusted source. Basically, this identity data is in the form of tokens which can exchange the data between service provider and identity provider to make easy. So it is in the form of tokens, like about the user information and like user in email address information and password. So both exchange the token between the service provider and identity provider. The next question is how to implement SSO in microservices. It's always a single question, but in terms of like the way the interviewer may ask an indirect question. So like how you're going to implement SSO, how you're going to implement the sessions or the pages or across the application. So they may ask any type of questions like that. About JWT, uh, the interviewer may ask like how you are able to provide security to microservices. So the JWT, the JSON Web Token, is another way of providing security to Microsoft Microsoft microservices. So the difference is like the once the user is logged into this service, and each subsequent request will include JWT and allowing the user to access the root services, whatever page navigation resources, all has can be permitted to use with that same token. And also it has the expiry dates, like we can set the expiry date, how much we can do that navigating. And single sign-on is also feature is uses widely JWT, and because of its small overhead and ability to easily used across a different domain. That's why we use single sign-on here. And also, said before, like service provider and identity provider transferring the information between these two providers is JSON Web Token is another way of exchanging the information between the two parties. I think we can explain to the interview like how the structure of the EJS and web token like header, signature, and it follows the base 64 URL standards. So we can explain to the interview for a better clarity. Yeah, we can explain here like the client application uses this authorization code and grant an access token from the service provider to provide the authorization server. So here is like why like how we can use the OAuth to uh, can help here. And also client application uses access token to ask identity provider for some personal detail. And so here is the SAML will also help to for authorization and authenticating the request. So we can explain it like how we like with the diagram, if possible, if any screen sharing is, if they're asking us to, we can share the screen with the diagram. So for a Spring Boot applications, like how like it is useful, I can show the some example, just like high level. The client uses the access token and asks the identity provider. Like identity provider can be GitHub or anything. So uh, it asks for it, and some like personal details will be provided and permitted to that, and including the login and name. So the identity provider is act as a resource server here and decoding the token and sending back to the client. So if the process is successful, the app insert into the user details into the Spring security context is another object. Once it is authenticated, it will always the repository, the backend details will be stored when the user finishing this login details. Here is a configure how to configure application.yml like Spring security or to client here registration. So it's a GitHub and client ID, client secret here. So all the ID and the secret ID has to be defined here, the application.xml or application.yml, whatever configuration we're using. Here is the best diagram. So uh, like explain in the best way, like a service provider, client, and identity provider. I think authentication is once the client access the service, authentication is granted, and post, and again it's like HTTP post authentication, and the authentication request is verified here. User logins to do that and redirects to the service with the SML token. This is for here is SML token will be redirect back to the client and sorry identity provider. Here is the best example we can explain with the diagram here. Service provider, client, accessing the client, and identity provider. So like when a client accesses this service, like a service like a Gmail or a GitHub, sorry, the Gmail, and the identity, the Google is identity provider here. Gmail is a service. So like its authentication request is granted and post HTTP post authentication request verified, and user logins into that and redirect with the SML token. So token back to the service provider. This is the we can explain with the SML token. So the next question they may ask like how you're going to what is the what is the difference between SML and OAuth 2? Here is a few differences between SAML and OAuth. SAML is a security assertion markup language. Its primary role of this is to provide online security that enables the access for multiple applications with the same set of login credentials. It means that if you are accessing the multiple application, so you don't need to enter login credentials every time when you are accessing the applications. So it's like managing a single sign-on for all the applications. And OAuth is to similar way to manage the authorization part. So like whenever you need to give a consent for whenever accessing the application and without entering or without revealing the actual password. So we don't need to enter the password. And both protocols we can use as the same application, for one for authorization and another for authentication. Uh, and without revealing the user credentials. And also the SAML grant this access the application. Once this grants the application, what will allow access to be protected, protected resources, access to the protected resources. So all this can be seen like whenever if you press F12, either Chrome or Firefox, and follow the network traffic for all the hops. So it's redirect back like if any the service provider back to forth, like if you take it as a GitHub, and you will be back to the home page like a new city, new cookies header and JSession ID. You can see this all this paths back and forth for the service provider. SAML contains the user identity information because it has to provide both username and password for access, providing authentication, and whereas OAuth, you don't need to maintain the user identity information. It is just a authorization. It's like a bypassing and just uh, providing the consent to the authorization to application. And SAML is XML based open standard, transferring the data between service provider and identity provider. OAuth also will be using XML some extent, but the main transferring data between service provider and identity provider is JSON. Another difference is, so the implement is a security system that helps authenticate and authorize the XML based tokens in SAML. OAuth 2 frameworks which allows just a consent to the application when interact with the another application without revealing the password. Here, the when you are we are accessing like GitHub, and it provides this authorization whether you by accessing either Gmail or Facebook. If you want to use any application URL like a GitHub or any other application you want to use it has to provide some authorization, say Gmail or Facebook. So hence you will, these will be provided for authorization to access to the service provider. Hope you like this video. If you really like this video, please like, share and comment and subscribe. Thank you.